Okay, we're live.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. Good evening, everybody. Hello. I hope you're all doing well. I hope your families are safe and healthy. I hope that if you haven't heard me say this at the previous meeting, I hope your family got through the storm the other week okay. Your power's back and everything is as close to normal as it can be in these completely, utterly abnormal times. Good evening, everybody. Hello. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo, Christine.
Yes, it should be fine now. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. So welcome to the third meeting that we're doing, the second of parent meetings. We also did a staff meeting earlier in the week. We have another parent meeting tomorrow morning for those people for whom the evening meetings might not be as convenient. And this meeting is themed around the topic of secondary schools reopening. Assuming that there are probably some people who didn't attend last night's meeting, I'm going to go through some of the things I started that meeting with. If you've heard this once already, I apologize for the repetition, but I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to share this with everyone in the community. Obviously, we've been working all summer, really since the day we closed, thinking about how we'll go about reopening when the time comes. In the spring, there was a sense, at least early on, that our closure might not be protracted, and we had anticipated the possibility of reopening. We delayed the cancellation of sports as long as we could in the hopes that we might reopen. But obviously, as we all know, that wasn't possible. And we've been closed as a school since then, with the exception of in-person special education summer school, which is running this summer. And we're working hard on how to reopen for the fall. Obviously, physical safety is at the foundation of all safety. And we're taking all of that very seriously. What I've said repeatedly is that it is not possible for us to eliminate all risk. The governor decided on August 7th that schools could reopen. It's up to schools to figure out how to do that. Our goal has been to minimize every risk that we can't eliminate altogether. So we've been working at that diligently, and we've put our reopening plans on our website. We published an FAQ in response to the first round of questions that we got from parents and staff and community members. What will happen after this series of meetings that we're holding this week, we'll take the questions, we'll turn them into thematic questions. There are a lot of repeated questions, and we'll answer all of those in another FAQ, or we'll refer back to where those questions were already answered in either the district reopening plan or the district FAQ, so that parents, staff have a real sense of all that's been put into place, what the plans look like going into the fall, how best to plan, and how to make good decisions for yourself. The one thing that we don't have is a lot of fine-grained detail yet. We're working on that, but this is, I can say quite confidently, the most complicated, difficult work that I've ever done in my career, and that's now 30 years in and around the education business. This has been an incredibly challenging task. Our staff has been extraordinary. We had a task force of almost 100 people combing through the challenges, evaluating the pros and cons of various options and paths we could go down. Ultimately, we made some selections of those paths based on parent survey data, staff survey data, feedback from task force members, and we've started to assemble the plan. But there's no way that this plan was going to be done 3 weeks ahead of time. This is going to be something that we are literally going to be working on right up until the very last day. And I anticipate that throughout the first couple of weeks of school, as we start to see what the planning looks like in person, we're going to want to make a lot of adjustments, and we're probably going to want to make those adjustments very quickly. So I anticipate that we're going to learn a lot from the first couple of days of school. We're going to try to be agile, and we're going to ask for a lot of patience. We know that parents want this to be perfect. Syosset parents in particular want it to be perfect. We get that. But we also know that we're in a pandemic, and no matter what we do, despite our best efforts, it's not going to be perfect this year. It's going to be the best that we can do based on the constraints that we're all dealing with and the incredibly unusual environment that we're working in. I'm thinking a lot about us as a community. And one of the things that I personally found so rewarding about an otherwise really challenging and difficult and painful spring is how our community pulled together and how our young people literally led the way in finding ways, despite the quarantine, despite the isolation, of being bright spots and finding ways to contribute to our community, to the larger community through their efforts. They're remarkable, and I'm glad I get a chance to thank and to praise them. This is our secondary meeting. Many of those students are in our secondary schools, and so very well represented. And I'm just so tremendously proud to be associated with these young people who are making such a big difference. I'll also say, going into the fall and thinking about this reopening and all of the work that we've done to try and do what we can as a school to minimize risk and enhance safety, we all have to kind of pull together as a community. And the metaphor that I've been using is the idea of a barn raising. When everyone does their part, something extraordinary and lasting can be created. Having a school operate in this kind of environment is going to take all of us doing our part. And it's going to take all of us making decisions that are safety focused first. And there will be times when there will be a choice between discomfort and the risk of disease. And we will choose the discomfort. We hope that you'll choose the discomfort too, and prioritize safety above all. That will mean the kinds of things that particularly secondary students take for granted, really enjoy: time with friends, time playing, time together, time in close proximity. These things will not be, they will not contribute to the safety of the overall community. And as unfortunate as it will be, as uncomfortable as it will be, as much as it may disappoint the young people in our community, we'll have to make decisions for probably the next year that are really focused first on how we keep one another safe. If we do that, if we say that our priority is we want to have our children able to attend school, able to learn in the best way possible, which is in a classroom with our incredible Syosset teachers, the price that we're going to pay for that opportunity is that we're going to have to make some decisions that prioritize school above other things that we might want, but that increase risk overall. So we can clean the school as much as we possibly can, but if there are things happening outside of the school and away from our control that aren't safe, there's no amount of effort that we can put in that can mitigate that risk. So we need to work as partners. We need to work as members of a shared community. The staff, the students, the parents, everyone has a part to play in this. And I know we can do it. If any place can do it, we can do it. I see the spirit of our children in the charitable efforts that they lead with, and I know that they'll want to be part of that effort. We just have to make sure that we all keep our eye on that. I've said repeatedly to the task force and in other places that I think my own judgment is that we're probably 5 months into what may be an 18-month crisis. And if we lose stamina now after 5 months, no matter how fatigued we are by wearing masks, how fatigued we are by social distance, by not being able to do the social things that we enjoy and love and need in our lives, if we run out of steam too soon, we risk having all of the progress we made this spring reversed. So we have to all calibrate our stamina. We have to look at this as something that we're in for the long haul. If something happens in the middle of this year that is miraculous and wonderful, we will all celebrate and we will be poised to react to that quickly. But what we should plan for and how we should pace ourselves is more like a marathon than a sprint. So with that said, I want to just talk a little bit about the timeline of the work that we've been doing. The state told us that they were going to give us reopening guidance in early June. That guidance came in mid-July, and the guidance has been evolving since then. So we've had to be agile. I know that we were frustrated by some of these delays, but as I said to a reporter a couple of weeks ago, if I was the governor, I would want to take my time and get it right too. And so certainly with these reopening plans, we are going absolutely as fast as we can, but we also want to make sure that we take the time to get it right as much as we possibly can. So the governor made his decision on the 7th of August to reopen schools. The very next business day, we held a board meeting. The board granted us emergency authorization to do a number of things that will allow us to move very quickly to make some capital improvements to the district that will help improve the safety of the environment. So we're working very hard at that. Obviously, that was an investment that wouldn't make sense if we were still going to be in the virtual environment. But now that we know we will have many people live and in person, we need to make those investments, and we're working on that as quickly as possible. So this is a work in progress. Your questions are extraordinarily helpful. We've been reading all of the questions that have come in over the course of the last several days. They identify places where the information that we've put out already clearly needs supplementing, so that people have a sense of, we have now a sense of the questions that remain. And it's also helping us make sure that we've got a comprehensive checklist of the work that still needs to be done. Your questions remind us of all the things that parents are wondering as we start to get ready to go back into the school environment in about 3 weeks from now. So I am joined by the people who have been leading this work in the school district. As you can imagine, every facet of school operations has been impacted by this effort to figure out how to reopen in a different kind of environment and to do so safely. And so I'm going to just introduce the people who are on the screen in the order that they appear in my Zoom window, which may be different from the order they appear in your Zoom window. So we'll call it no particular order. Christine Payne is our Executive Director of IT Services. She's our Chief Technology Officer, the person who behind the scenes is making sure that everything works in the district, and that as we go to an even more robust virtual experience in the fall, we will have adequate technology and tools in the hands of teachers, and we will have robust online curriculum materials and really good bandwidth and equipment that will keep working. She's put together a kit for teachers called a Classroom to Go that includes not just a powerful laptop, but a document camera that will turn a desk into a whiteboard to be projected, a tablet so that you can write on a screen, a microphone to make sure that the teacher's voice is well understood, and just a tremendous amount of work behind the screens. Charlie Cardillo, in a couple of weeks, will become the interim deputy superintendent of the organization. The current deputy superintendent, Ms. Bavard, will be retiring at the end of the month. Charlie will fill in for her until we find a permanent replacement. In new to the assistant superintendency is Dr. Teresa Curry. She is currently our executive director of human resources, will shortly become our assistant superintendent for instruction. Gregory Hamilton is our executive director of operations. Among other things, security and building operations are under his control. We have been in the midst of several large capital projects over the course of the last couple of years, and we had two very large capital projects planned for this summer: bathroom renovations and air conditioning. The timing certainly propitious, but these have been in the works for a number of years. These would already be large projects to manage. We have added to that all of the changes to our facilities that have become necessary in order to do reopening. So Greg and his team have literally been working nonstop to try and get us ready for the fall. Dr. Tricia Rufo is our assistant superintendent for business. She is not only responsible for acquiring all of the things that we need to do our work, but responsible for food services and busing. And I'm just going to pause on busing for a moment and say that busing is going to be one of our biggest challenges. We'll return to this a little bit later in the presentation tonight, but it's important for folks to know that this is a part of the process that we have not solved yet, because this is a particularly challenging problem. And then lastly, Dr. Joe Lamelza, who is our assistant superintendent for pupil personnel services. His office is responsible for students with disabilities or students who need 504 accommodations, and he supervises our psychologists and the staff who are really looking out for the social and emotional health, not just of students, but of the staff in the school district as well. So this is the team that has been working most closely. They have been leading teams of their own through this work. I'm going to ask each one of them to talk a little bit about the work that has been going on in their area. What they're doing is we've gone through all of the questions, we've grouped them by themes, and we're going to try and answer the questions that have cropped up the most and therefore seem to be of the greatest interest first, and then we'll work our way through if we have time to get to others. The ones that we don't get to, we will put into an FAQ so that we'll put things up on the website and parents have an opportunity to look at them. So without any further ado, I'd just like to turn it over to Mr. Cardillo, and we're going to talk, above all, we are a teaching and learning organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about the secondary programs. We're going to start first by talking about what the in-person secondary programs look like at the middle school, at the high school, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the virtual programs look like at both places. So Charlie.
Okay, good evening. So let's get right into it. And I'm going to use a authentic example to go through the high school, which is on an alternating day model, and we'll track a student going through a day. We're going to deal with myself as young Charlie Cardillo, and I'm going to be starting school in person at Syosset High School on that Tuesday, the September 8th. And I'm going to take young Tom Rogers, who's going to be on the virtual starting on that Tuesday, the 8th, in the virtual program. So we'll follow this through over the next couple minutes. So really the way the high school has set up its program, we have, in a school that had over 2,200 students, we have around 320 plus students that are taking the virtual program. So what that means is with around 1,900 students, roughly on that 8A, that Tuesday, September 8th, there'll be around 950 students in person. That would be Charlie Cardillo and 950 of his classmates, young Charlie Cardillo. And then at the same time, at home would be young Tom Rogers with his classmates from Syosset, following the same schedule. So we'll all be on a period 1 through 9 schedule, a 40-minute period schedule as we go through it, the tradition that Syosset has had. And in essence, what would take place during the course of the day is, as the students in the in-person program, let's start with period 1, it's US History, AP. And in that particular day, the teacher would be involved in working with his in-person students. It could be 14 or 15 students in the class. And then at the same time, there'll be the virtual students, the group that young Tom Rogers is with and his classmates. There would be 14 students being involved in the program virtually. In essence, what Christine Payne has been involved in with the teachers is the classroom to go that Dr. Rogers had referred to. So as the teacher is working with the in-person students that day, that particular teacher may also be working on a document camera, a laptop, and so that the student at home who's working virtually would be able to see work that goes onto a whiteboard and so on, during the course of the day. So in essence, we take our schedule, period 1, we break as we've done before, we travel to period 2, period 3, period 4, and that becomes our format for the day. Now we go to Wednesday, September 9th. At that point in time, young Tom Rogers is in person, and we starts in the AP US History first period class. Young Charlie Cardillo and his classmates now are watching virtually, and we repeat that as we go through the same process. Period 1, we travel to period 2, then period 3, period 4, and so on during the course of the day, taking both the core area subjects and many of the wonderful electives that Syosset has been known to offer and our students have taken full advantage of. So the in-person, last year, a year ago, we would have opened with, very simply, young Charlie and young Tom in one class where there were 27 students. You see what we had to do this year through the social distancing constraints that are placed upon the maximum class sizes in any class, where we honor the 6 foot social distancing. That caused us then to have to go to the alternating day model, because we could not actually fit all the students into a all-in model, which we were able to do in the K through 8 program, which led us to go into the alternating day model that the students would currently be following. A couple advantages of this, again, is that we see that at any given time, there are smaller number of students in the class. And we also see just within the building itself, as we go from a building of 2,200 plus to 950, is a significant difference, even as they go through the hallways on a period by period basis. And I want to just take the time just to acknowledge the people, the frontline people who have played an extraordinary effort in the role, and the one that you'll be closely involved with For those of you who have your sons or daughters at the high school, John Durante, principal, Ray Gessner, assistant principal, Chris Raffini, assistant principal, David Steinberg, Matt Lowe, also assistant principals, and our directors and coordinators, Michael Salzman for the performing arts and music and art, Drew Cronin, physical education and scholastic athletics, Mary Lou Sapienza, special ed, John Genova, coordinator of math, Ray Laversa, coordinator of science, and Amanda Barney for coordinator of English. That team of people throughout, really starting back to middle of March, have worked tirelessly, taking us through the end of the school year, and then really extraordinary work being done here in the summer. I can mention that because I've had 45 years of involvement in public education, 12 years as superintendent at Manhasset, many years as a high school principal of a very large school, which had 3,300 students and 350 staff members involved. So I look in awe really of the team that Dr. Rogers has put together and the team there at the high school that really have done Herculean work. So I hope as the students come back on the opening day, as we greet the students to Syosset High School, and really in a really upbeat, positive manner, the same could go for the students as they see the administrative staff and you as parents, and really, be thankful to them for all that they've done during the course of this year. So let's now switch gears for a second and take it to the in-person program. One more minute before we move away from the high school. I do want to emphasize, since we mentioned Michael Salzman with the arts is tremendously valued here in Syosset. And again, Michael Salzman, in conjunction with the high school administrative staff, has done a wonderful job of trying to navigate and ensure that the ensembles will continue, lessons will continue at this level. So our students will have the benefit really of a world-class fine arts and performing arts program, and which is really a wonderful thing for our community that we're able to do this. It's not that easy a thing to put this together. On the middle school level, let's take a look at what we've done over there, which is a little different as we've worked in a all-in model, okay? As you know, the district provided the opportunity at the 7 elementary schools and the 2 middle schools for every student, K-8, to have the opportunity to participate every day on a full day basis, which we call the in-person model. What we've seen is that we have approximately 340 middle school students who will be attending virtually. They're on the all virtual program that we have. So a school like HBT, which would have had around 900 students, right now is around the area of 700. And Southwoods, which would have had around 740 or so students, has around 140 plus students taking the virtual program. So they'll open with around 600 students in their program. So you can see in all 3 secondary schools that compared to our previous year, that the overall in-person enrollment is down significantly at the high school and down at each of the 2 middle schools. And so the structure would be in this manner. And there's a number of questions that we'll be able to address as we go through the evening related to the cohort, teaming, and things of that nature and so on. But both Kevin Bonanno, the principal, with Michelle Burgett over at Southwoods, and their assistants, Jamal Graham, Christian Harrigan, who's split between both schools, Alan Chipatine, Liz Burke over at Southwoods, and Teresa Burke. Around 3 weeks ago, we shifted gears. We made a significant shift as to what we were looking at through the task force that Dr. Rogers was leading, that task force of 100 individuals that were working tirelessly and trying to really get us to a model that we could implement for K-8 and then in the high school. And the big shift that we took at that time was that it looked like we were going to be leaning towards an alternating day model at the middle school. We then spent significant time in examining the all-in model, and we made a really huge commitment. But that commitment meant that, yes, while we could get all students into both HBT and Southwoods, it was at really maximizing every space in the building being utilized like it has never been before. So a year ago, if we would have opened up at the middle schools, it would be the traditional class size. We'd have 27 in English class, and they were located in one room. We'd had social studies 7 with 26 students in a class located in one classroom. But the all-in model really led to having constraints based upon the social distancing caps that are in place by really influenced by square footage of the rooms, where we might have only 14 students allowed in a room, 15 students allowed in a room, 13 students. So what we had to do was then take that English 7 class where there may have been 26 or 27, and now say that there is 13 or 14 in the one teacher's class. That's we call the pilot or the teacher of record. And then in the co-pilot's class, 13 students in that particular class. So let's examine really what that model really entails. And we would have seen the same thing in grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, where in many cases, not all, there might be some situations where really the way the numbers fell in a particular grade level, maybe grade 8, where we could run a class of 20 or 22 and have it be or 20 in a room, or 19 because of square footage. And we didn't have to have a co-pilot. But let's focus for a minute on the co-pilot model, where we have the experienced teacher in one room, the co-pilot in another room. And what will take place is that what we'll see during the course of the year is that that teacher, that experienced teacher, will be spending times in both rooms during the course of the year. It may contribute to the co-pilot moving to the experienced teacher's room as the pilot moves over to the co-pilot's room and carries out a lesson in English, or if it could be in social studies, in whatever area it might be, math or science. The same thing would apply for each of the 4 core areas as we go through this. There might be an opportunity at times where the pilot is remaining in his room with his students or her students, and we have a live stream in the sense of what we mentioned before about the use of the document camera or a laptop, and that the students would be in the co-pilot's class, the beneficiary of what would be taking place at that time. So there's a lot of different options as we really implement this model in grade 6 through 8 to allow really for our students to take advantage of, number one, the small class sizes, but number two, the expertise and the experience of, in many instances, the pilot and the co-pilot, particularly in the 4 core areas. So what you'll notice is, though, and what the building administration was able to, in both buildings, do, and really do it at a level of high expertise, is really have it be that that cohort would stay in their room where they started the day. And by the way, I should always reference that there's a 20-minute period or so that the students are involved to start the day at each middle school, called an advisory period. And both principals and the administration and teachers felt strongly about having that period serve as a starting point for the middle school students, as a way to touch base, as the old kind of homeroom, but also really have the opportunity for other meaningful items to take place in that 20-minute period of time. You'll note at the end of the day, we have the opportunity to also close a day where the student would then finish his period of time in his period classroom, and from there they would be dismissed from that particular class. So as we look at this particular model, as we get into there will be opportunities for students to move. Some of the questions that people have are my son and daughter, are they only restricted to the students in that particular cohort, which may be a small number. It could be 13, 14, or 15, again, because the classes are split. But there'll be opportunities where the students will have for music or art or physical education or world language or instructional support, reading lab, whatever it might be. There'll be areas there for some limited movement of students to take place also during the course of the day as we go through this. The key thing is, again, that as we look at its entirety, we moved from a 9-period day, which has historically been in place here at HBT and Southwoods, to an 8-period day. And we understand and we value everything that the 9-period day offered. And we're hoping that when we get to 21, 22, a year from now, that we'll have the opportunity to go back to the traditional 9-period day and re-examine then how we wanted, what course offerings we would use and so on. But for this year, in order to make the all-in model work, we had to go to the 8-period day. And even then, it was a challenge to initially fit the students in the classes. And as I went around to each of the buildings and really looked to see where we were 2 weeks ago, a week ago, and even now, we've made progress. because at one time we may have had significant number of students, classes in cafeterias and other large spaces and so on. And we were able to reduce these situations at the middle school, and in some cases really completely move away from it. How were we able to do that? Really because of the large number of students that were taking the virtual program and so on. So let me just take a step back before we jump into the virtual world to just say one thing. I'm a parent of 6 sons. They're a little older right now, but I know from my wife's perspective and my perspective, these are difficult decisions that parents have had to make. As they said, should we have our child, son or daughter, be in the in-school program, or should we have our son or daughter be into the virtual program? There really is no right or wrong. It's really what a mom and dad feel what's best for their son or daughter. And the same thing as we go through it is that we feel strongly that we're a family and we're a sense of community. And I think you see that both at the high school and at HBT and Southwoods, and that sense of community is still very important. And we know with all that this pandemic has brought about and so on, there are concerns that people have as their child, moves on into the in-person and so on. And I ask and I encourage people to give the in-person program the time that it needs. Dr. Rogers referred to it, that there will be some bumpy moments at the beginning of the year in that first opening 4 days. It'll probably move on into the second week and the third week in September, that there'll be items that would not have been as problematic a year ago. But now as we work through them as an administrative team, we're committed to then assessing what we're doing, reassessing, making modifications and so on. But in essence, what we're always charged to do is do what's in the best interest of your son and daughters. So let's skip then to the virtual program. So the virtual program at the high school would work in the following way. We've mentioned already that every other day, there's a portion of students, around half the population, that's already taking the virtual program every other day. But again, as we mentioned, there's right now around 320 plus students who will be taking it every day. They're an important part of our community. They're an important part of our school. And we have to have that kind of same connection that we feel for these students in person, that we can continue to establish for the youngsters that are taking the virtual program. So what will happen is that the virtual students taking it every day will join their classmates then on both days, on that alternating day cycle where let's go back to that first period US History AP class, where on A day, there are the in-person students, there's the students doing the virtual program who are alternating, and then there's a third group. That's those 300 plus students. And in this particular case, let's say there were 5 for this US History period 1, that would be on both that A day or B day. I know, Dr. Durante, you're going to say, Charlie, it's not A day, B day. It's red, W, and we just continue that cycle. But I think our parents get the picture here as we go through it. But for our virtual students, then they'll have the opportunity to view the product that's taking place through the document camera and the laptop, and they can see that. At times, there may be some engagement, along the way, although we have said that our focal point, the one thing that Syosset has done that's been outstanding has historically been the in-person program. So we have to find opportunities there. There'll be some independent work that you'll be doing as a teacher is working with the students in person and then has them do some group work. At the same time, students in the virtual program may be doing some independent work along the way. There'll be opportunities for the students in the virtual program to make contact with their individual teachers that they have through the extra help program that will be set up in place. And that's a virtual extra help program, so that we ensure that that questions that you normally might approach a teacher about or raise your hand to and so on, and then perhaps at times in the virtual environment, and I emphasize at times in the virtual environment, that perhaps that there wasn't the opportunity for that. You have really 2 ways of doing that, to maybe perhaps what I would call office hours, maybe the high school would call it something else, where perhaps you can reach out and email your teacher with a question, preferably before 5 o'clock or so they have time really to, when they get home, to plan and spend time with their family. And then also more as importantly is really with the virtual extra help that will be set up by your teachers through the support of the administrative staff. And then when we take it to the, and again, the all virtual students will be following their 9-period day. So I think you're going to see then a significant difference from what people experienced when mid-March occurred and our students at Syosset went out for the rest of the school year. And people had different thoughts as to really the quality of the program and so on. I do have to say that the quality of the program at Syosset, when you look at the body of work compared to 124 districts, was really in that top 1 or 2% of all of Long Island. And yet we realize that there still has to be more done to try to provide even within the circumstance of what we have this year, as we hope to really, continue to have the opportunity to have an in-person program and not have to retreat to a full remote program for all of our students. One final thing is taking a look at the middle school in-school program would be again, Kevin Bonanno, Michelle Burgett. I really have to compliment them, and with Adele Brevard, who's not here tonight, as she's with her family, but they played an instrumental role as we were working out what would be the model that we put in place. And both principals and their administrative staff and their teachers felt strongly that the youngsters at HBT and Southwoods needed that personal connection with their school, with their home school. So what they did was, and this was an extraordinary undertaking, and really the schedulers in the building, Teresa Burke and Jamal Graham at HBT and Teresa Burke over at Southwoods, I mean, masterfully, really were able to put this together so that a teacher of English 7 would have 4 sections of English section 7 in person and 1 assignment dedicated to the English 7 virtual students. So you can see the difference between what we're doing at the high school, and those of you who have parents, children at the elementary. This is a different model that's in place that we were able to put into place at the middle school, really as a result of the philosophical beliefs of the administration saying this is really the right thing to do. So again, these 140 plus students at Southwoods, these almost 200 students at HBT are all virtual. They will follow their 8-period schedule for that day. And again, let's remember then what will take place is that at some point in time for the virtual students, there will be then, in addition to the core area teachers, they'll have their music, world language, and all built into that 8-period day that they're following, their 8-period schedule as we go through it. So,
Mr. Cardillo,
yes.
just at that moment, one of our earlier documents did have a schedule where there was a time difference that's been since updated. Would you
Yes.
just be able to clarify for the parents the start time for the virtual as compared to the students that are in person? I think an earlier document had a time frame that was a later start. And I believe at this point that the start times for the high school are the same regardless of in-person or virtual.
For now, and then I'll verify this, but I have the schedule in front of me that serves as the 8-period day. And since they're following the 8-period day schedule, for right now, the period 1 begins at 8:40 and goes to 9:18. And then there's 5-minute passing. Obviously, the students at virtual have a 5-minute break. And then you pick up period 2 at 9:23 and so on down the line as they follow that schedule that they left. Because in this case, what we're doing is mirroring what the schedule is by the fact that the teacher's assignment falls under, it could be a period 5 assignment, period 4 assignment, period 3 assignment. So we're mirroring the schedule that the middle school people have put together there, and the students would have the opportunity to do the same. When lunchtime comes up, they will then, the students at their home, have lunch as they go through it, and they bounce back 40 minutes later into the next period, whatever period that might be, and so on, as we go through it.
And then the same at the high school, correct?
Well, the high school students, yes, the high school students, again, unlike as people got maybe as they're looking at the elementary model and so on, which would be a little different. The high school student, I believe they start at 7:39. And they, again, will follow that traditional schedule that's been in place in that 40-minute periods. And then there's a passing time that would be taking place. I believe that's 5 minutes. And then we get into period 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 at the high school, 8 at the middle school.
All right, whenever we start talking about start times, I start thinking about busing. And I mentioned earlier that busing is going to be one of the most challenging things that we will have to figure out before the beginning of the school year. And the reason why this is so challenging is really a couple of things. The first is we want to have fewer kids on buses, but the number of buses that we have access to will not change. The number of buses is finite. And there was a bus driver shortage even before the pandemic, and it has gotten worse since the pandemic because the drivers tend to be older and therefore less willing to take risk. So busing is going to be a challenge. When we surveyed parents, about half of parents said that they were not going to put their children on the bus. When we asked parents then to opt out so that we could actually start doing the routing, and we do routing by counting all of the kids that are going to be along that route and trying to figure out how many kids on that route are going to be on the bus and whether that bus is going to be a less dense ride, or if we're unable to make that ride less dense. And very few parents, only about 15, 1.5 as opposed to 50% of parents decided to opt out of busing. So that has made building these routes very challenging. Now, I've spoken to a lot of parents who have said, well, I don't want to opt out of busing and then not have the chance to opt back in again. But what it does mean is that basically we're assuming that parents are not going to put their children on buses based on the earlier survey and this feedback that we've gotten. But we also know that we have to build routes. And as we build the routes, there will just be a number of students who are on that route. And so the solutions to these challenges are not appealing. The solutions are having more students on the bus or having more bus runs, which means even earlier start times at the high school for rounds of buses, because the same bus might have to make 2 trips through the neighborhood and then back to the high school. So you could see very early bus pickup times. And the same thing at the end of the day, having multiple loops, we call them multiple loops, for elementary students. So Dr. Rufo and I were working on busing a lot today. I'd just like her to take us through a little bit of where they are with the busing and some of the decisions that are still left in front of your team.
Okay, so as Dr. Rogers said, busing is finite, both in terms of numbers of buses that our contractor Huntington Coach can provide, as well as drivers. So while we initially had planned and done some preliminary routing based on the initial survey of 50% of people not riding, we were able to significantly reduce the density on the buses. And as we then move towards actually having parents commit to not taking the bus for a certain period of time, we realized that those numbers were not holding. So really, we're looking at reductions in density of much less than what we had anticipated. So that does leave us with the situation that we're in currently, which is looking at potentially modifying some routes to sort of level to the extent we can the ridership. We also have to look at the possibility of, again, on routes that we may not be able to reduce, doing double loops. Again, because of the implication that has on start times, those are not ideal situations. So we are at the point of working with Huntington Coach, trying to find additional routes for those that look like they're close to the limits. Now, there is originally we had planned to do 1 per seat, which is a challenge given the numbers that we're having. We're also just as an aside, looking at what other districts are doing, and many of those are doing 44, which is 2 in a seat. We continue to try to have density less than 2 in a seat, which is closer to working clearly at the high school, because you have half the students coming. The elementary schools, we're working on those routes, and the middle school is probably more challenging in terms of the numbers of buses at this point that have a higher density than what we had planned. So while at this point, at this time in the year, we're typically wrapping up our routing, I would say we're still working very hard to bring those numbers down. Also, in terms, another challenge that we face is that parents do have the opportunity, which is what was presented in the survey, of once they become more comfortable with their students riding the bus, of opting for transportation. So managing that fluctuation, it will be a challenge actually throughout the year. So, you know, in summary, transportation, like many of the different aspects of schooling, is presenting us with new challenges. And just to follow up on some new protocols, which will also impact, in addition to routing, we also have new protocols both for boarding the bus and for leaving the bus. And we want to, we'll be sending communications out regarding social distancing at the bus stops, new ways that we'll have to have students load from the back of the bus first and then exit from the front to minimize interaction in a confined space of the buses. We'll also, working with the buses, they will be opening windows where it's safe, and the roof hatches that have ventilation, exhaust fans in them will be operational as well to increase the fresh air that's in buses, in addition to the cleaning protocols that Huntington Coach is engaging in, both daily cleaning and as well as the disinfecting that they are doing. We will also be students will be required to wear masks on the bus, and if they present at the bus stop without them, we are supplying Huntington Coach with a supply of masks for drivers to give out to students should they forget their masks. So those are the, I think those are the main issues related to transportation that we're dealing with, and we are still in process of the routing, and that's certainly one area that will be down to the wire.
Thank you, Dr. Rufo. Dr. Lamelza, I know you've been thinking about how to welcome students and staff back, and we all recognize that these last 5 months have been challenging, to say the least, and for some potentially traumatic. And we want, obviously, to transition back to a more normal environment, but this will not feel quite like the normal environment that we're used to. And I know we're looking to support all of our learning community. If you could talk a little bit about these return to school, emotional health efforts that your office has been making, and then maybe switch to talk a little bit about special education services. We'll go back into the classroom.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Good evening, everyone. Yes, as Dr. Rogers said, that has been in the forefront of the work that my group has been doing, and it really has been a group effort. I thank all of the contributors. We really are taking a very proactive stance in terms of being cognizant of the kinds of concerns that our students are going to present with at the secondary level, as well as our families. So we have really worked to build stronger relationships with some community-based services and agencies. We are looking to have actually a presentation for parents, hopefully before school starts, to just address sort of the anxiety of it all, coming back and then having kids return to school and dealing with the stress of the COVID pandemic. In addition to that, we are also looking at adding more onto the website. We have several sort of quick tutorials, if you will, that parents can access. Our plan is to add more by our own social workers or our own psychologists, and even again, maybe some additional supports from the community-based centers that we can use and put up there. We also plan to be very proactive in terms of monitoring students, checking on students' progress. And you know, it's not just students and families, we're also talking about staff. We're very much aware of the stress that our staff is under too. So our mental health team is going to be very attuned to that. We'll be offering supports. Again, we'll be offering these sort of ongoing kind of opportunities to be able to share and discuss and perhaps give some strategies or just, you know, a sympathetic ear. So that, in addition to our regular counseling supports and services and programs that are in place at the high school level, the middle school and high school will also be working through the advisory model. That's really going to be, I think, a real conduit to keep regular tabs on how the students are doing. And as I said, just to reach out to all of our parents as well. So any concerns, any things that really are giving issue, please share those. You know, we have the psychologists, we have the social workers, we have a good referral system. If you're familiar with our MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, which has traditionally been more academic in focus, even though we've always addressed behavior and social emotional, we really have geared that up. We've actually created a model that will go through the tiers if you're familiar with MTSS. And that'll be something that our teams will share with our staff members. So you could see, you know, what kinds of things that you might expect at a tier 1 or would be something that you would expect a child to be going through. Tier 2 would be something that's a little more interruption or a little more concerning in the way students are displaying or dealing with school or not being engaged in school. And then we have what we call our tier 3, which is our top level, which then really speaks to having some very intense, more focused, more direct support. We also would continue to work with all the private therapists. If there's any ongoing relationship that families already have, we certainly are in a position to reach out to them, work with them, and build a wraparound plan that's going to tie in home and school. And that's really the ideal. So that really is a big part of what we're looking at for the secondary, as far as the social, emotional, mental health. As far as the special education, I know the one question we're getting a lot is, well, are we going to be giving the services as listed on the IEP? Our intent is to give the services as listed on the IEP, with my one phrase, to the greatest extent possible. And I say that only because there may be limitations that I'm not aware of right now. The buildings may not be aware of right now, as I think as Charlie was saying, you know, and Dr. Rogers, give it some time. We may have to work out some of the kinks, but you know, and they would be limitations as a result of space or staffing or timing or you know, space again, just again, maintaining the distance. But our intent is to provide the services, related services as well. We will be doing pull-out, push-ins, or virtual, or a combination of those, but the students will be getting their services. We are going to be looking at the annual goals from the IEP. They are going to be measured. They are going to be looked at. The committee, special education, will be meeting. We'll be doing all remote meetings. We're not going to have any in-person meetings. Again, to maintain the integrity of the safety protocols, and also just space is an issue to be able to do that. But if there's any concerns, if there's any need to make any adjustments to an IEP, we will. But having said that, I do want to distinguish that, you know, these are unusual times. This is a temporary, quote unquote, situation. Certainly we don't want to be here next year. So we don't design an IEP for a sort of a temporary emergency situation. We design an IEP for a long-term program to address the issues of the disability. So we're not really rushing to make a change on any IEPs unless we really are, as a team, looking at how the student's disability is impacting their performance. So any kind of accommodations or supplemental aids. I know there was a question about masks for students that might have some difficulty with masks as related to sensory issues. We'll design interventions. You know, our behaviorists are here. Our mental health people are here. We'll work with students. We'll train students. We'll help students. We'll, you know, have to make some adjustments to breaks if they need more or less. These things are things that we'll be able to address going forward. Dr. Rogers, I think we'll talk a little bit later if we have any issues with students that may not be able to wear masks, and we'll be attuned to that as well. So the IEPs are in effect. I know there were some concerns too about ICT, the integrated co-teaching. That is going to be a program that we are providing. We will have both teachers teaching co-taught lessons to our students, whether it be in the hybrid model or in the in-person model. Again, that might be live direct instruction by both teachers. It could be done, again, remotely. It could be done again through technology, something that's pre-taped. But the power of the co-teaching model is to have both teachers working together, planning collaboratively, and delivering instruction to the students together, and then being able to break out and support them and follow up on the kinds of instructional supports that they need. So all of that will be in place as well. Our students are going to be following the schedule. Of course, our 6 through 8 are coming in daily. And our hybrid students, as Mr. Cardillo explained, are going the on and off day. But our life skills students, those students that have more complex needs or have certainly have work-based learning, vocational learning concerns, we are planning on having them attend every day. And I think that makes a lot of sense because we need to be able to maintain that level of service for those students. So I think that touches on the questions that I've received. Please, I'm here. You can send me an email. We'll make any kind of contact that we need to. Ms. Sapienza, who is our Director of Pupil Personnel Services at the secondary level, particularly at the high school, is also available. So please, if you have questions, reach out to us, and we'll problem solve, because that's really the mode we're in.
Thank you, Dr. Lamelza. As Dr. Lamelza said, this is going to be a year of trying to absolutely make the best of it with every aspect of what we're doing. And one of the things that we're trying to make the best of is the facilities and the physical plant that we have. And that means that we're making a number of very muscular construction changes to our facilities, not just on the interior of the building, but site work that we're doing to try and streamline drop off at buildings. And Mr. Hamilton has been leading all of that work. He's been leading the team that also is in charge of doing maintenance work and custodial work. And so there is a lot underway, and I have asked him if he could just take us through a lot of that effort.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Rogers, and good evening. So the team has been working hard this summer on several projects that directly impact instruction. One of the things that we've reached that were underway is we are creating some additional student walkways in the high school, the berm, which is the area between the student drop-off and the bus loop, to help give parents and students easier access into the building. So we've created 2 additional walkways. We're near completion of a parent turnaround loop at the east side of Southwoods Middle School. We just completed new sidewalks and benches at the tennis court. It's more or less just to, give everybody a very safe and welcoming condition at that part of the facilities. We've done some road widening work at the high school pool area. So you're going to notice when you return that the road from the student lot to the pool is wider, and there will be additional parking by the pool. We just recently completed, I'm proud to say, a state-of-the-art high school fitness center. So when you see it, it's a beautiful addition to the high school building. That's been recently completed, as well as the front vestibule at the front of the high school, which was the area that joins the main office area and the gymnasium space. It's a wonderful addition to the building. We're near completion on bathroom renovations at HBT and Southwoods. So what is that going to look like? You're going to see new tiles, new fixtures. You're going to see touchless faucets, touchless toilets, touchless paper towel dispensers, and soap dispensers. That's all going to be inside the new parts of the restrooms as well, district-wide. We are also adding touchless paper towel dispensers and soap dispensers, all in an effort to help reduce touch points. District-wide air conditioning, we're finishing that up we're adding at Southwoods Auditorium and the high school auditorium, and the majority of the high school building are going to have what are called split air conditioning units. Excuse me, that should be completed in early September. And, finally, we've been working with our architects for much of the summer on social distancing guidelines. And they've also performed an assessment of fresh air and ventilation district-wide. So we've been working all summer on those items. Regarding fresh air and ventilations, as I think was mentioned earlier, we now have emergency authorization to produce a project we've just started where the architects have identified spaces that do not have adequate fresh air. And we've started working on this to provide the proper fresh air. It's primarily areas or offices, as classrooms, spaces that do not have windows. So we're providing mechanical fresh air in those spaces. New York State actively encourages additional fresh air. So classrooms that have windows, New York State's encouraging that the windows be cracked to help provide additional fresh air. Unfortunately, New York State is not giving us the authority and the ability to keep classroom doors open because of the fire code. Along the lines of fresh air intake, we've been working to upgrade our filtration systems. So every filtration system within the district, the filters are being upgraded to the highest level MERV filter rating possible. And MERV stands for minimum efficiency reporting value. And think of it as a rating system where 1 is a very, very inefficient, and a number such as a 13 or a 16 is much more efficient. The high number goes up to 20. Once you approach a 13, that's considered the superior level, which is approaching healthcare and other types of institutions. So we are working with the architects, and we are increasing the filtration level to the highest possible levels across the board. And that's something that the custodians and the maintenance workers are actively working on, as well as with the new air conditioning systems that are being installed this summer. We've asked and we've directed the contractors to upgrade each of those filters to the highest possible level. So those are the things that we're working on. And speaking of fresh air, it was discussed about fresh air and the importance of fresh air. And I know people have asked for outdoor learning spaces. What I'd like to report is that we're actively looking to procure tents for outdoor spaces for students and staff. It's not as easy as it was in the past. Tents are now regulated by the Office of Facilities Planning. So there are some guidelines that we have to meet. And for certain size tents, a certain number of tents, we now have to essentially get a building permit, which is an SED process. The architects have to do drawings and send it up to the state for state approval. Of course, in the pandemic, cleaning is paramount. I just want to report that the custodial staff and the tools that we use, all of the cleaning products are Green Clean certified, which means they're less toxic. That's always a good thing. All the disinfectants that we use are EPA certified. And for this year, we're going to begin to use an antimicrobial surface protection system. And that's something that we're going to use to help extend, the life and the protection of the hard surfaces throughout the district. Talked about paper towel dispenses. The custodians throughout the day will be disinfecting high touch points. That would be handrails, doorknobs, things that students and staff touch frequently. We will be disinfecting continuously throughout the day. And we will make available to classroom aides and monitors, cleaning supplies, and that will be used, either cleaning supplies and/or wipes, to help keep the classroom as clean as possible. So those are just some of the things that we've been working on, some of the things that we will continue to work on during the school year. Thank you, Dr. Rogers.
Thank you, Greg. And one of the questions that we get a lot, particularly at the high school, because there's going to be more movement between classrooms, is about the cleaning. And as Mr. Hamilton mentioned, we're using a cleaning product that has a multi-week effectiveness and potency on surfaces. So that is it's not a disinfectant that you put on and wipe off and it's a one-time use. It's something that is applied to surfaces so that they remain antimicrobial for a long period of time, and we'll be reapplying that periodically long before its effective period wears out. So other questions that have come through are about whether students can bring their own disinfecting wipes or hand sanitizer. I have not seen anything in the guidance that we get from the State Education Department that prohibits that. And so we will not prohibit that if students want to take that extra measure. We will not discourage it. Mr. Hamilton's team goes throughout the building, throughout the day, all of the buildings, and makes a priority of redisinfecting multiple times throughout the day, high touch point surfaces in all of the buildings. So cleaning was already a priority. Cleaning now has become an even higher priority. And we are throwing as much effort at it as we can with the people that we have. So with that said, I want to shift a little bit and talk about another hot topic that appears a lot. It has to do with masks and how the mask policy will be implemented and enforced. So I was on a Newsday webinar, was it yesterday? The days are kind of running together, I'm afraid. I was on a Newsday webinar, and one of the other panelists, Dr. Syed, said, you have to have the 3 W's. You have to wear your mask, you have to watch your distance, and you have to wash your hands. So Mr. Hamilton didn't mention the work that his team has been doing, but they've also purchased portable hand washing stations that will be distributed throughout the school district. They are looking now at places where in the buildings there is plumbing on one side of the wall, and therefore it might be possible to do a permanent hand washing station on the opposite side of the wall, maybe in a hallway where there's a bathroom on the other side of the hall. So they're looking at those opportunities as well. We want students to have all of the opportunities possible to be able to keep themselves clean and do the right thing. With masks, we are starting out with a very conservative mask policy. Everything that I have seen in terms of the guidance from the state, what I've been able to read in terms of the research, all seems to coalesce around the idea that the two most important things that we can do, the 2 things that reduce the most risk each, are wearing masks and maintaining social distance. And so we've been cautious to set up our classrooms with adequate space between students, and we have been conscious of wanting to have a very conservative mask policy where masks are worn nearly all of the time. The guidance does provide for brief mask breaks, but we not only want those mask breaks to be brief, we want them to be done in such a way that not everyone in the class is doing a mask break simultaneously. So if you imagine that there are 3 kids in a row, if the child in the middle does not have their mask off, the 2 children with their masks off are now 12 feet apart. And it just provides that extra measure of safety. So we'll reevaluate the mask policy periodically throughout the year, but we're going to start out with our focus and our priority being on safety. And we will wait for additional guidance from the state if any comes, but we'll also evaluate how that's working. There have been questions about whether there can be exceptions. I think some of the guidance that we put out was a little confusing. That's because we quoted the state. If we had written the guidance, it would have been perfectly clear. So the state does provide some exceptions, but the way to access those exceptions is to go through something known as the Section 504 process. That has to be completed before the start of school. You can't show up at school on the first day with a note from a doctor. You'll have to go through the 504 process. There's a link on our website that explains how to do that. It's handled by Dr. Lamelza's office. And we expect that the number of students for whom an accommodation might be required will be very low. And in the event of an accommodation, it will be some sort of way of offering protection in lieu of the mask. It will not be an accommodation that doesn't offer protection at all. And the same is true of staff who need a special accommodation as well. We'll work with the staff member to find a way of protecting themselves and the students in the classroom that is also consistent with whatever health issue they may have that is driving the need for some kind of an accommodation. The board at its last meeting adopted a change to our code of conduct that makes mask wearing mandatory, and failure to abide by the code of conduct will be treated as a disciplinary problem, just like any other disciplinary problem in the school. But it's going to be one that we take incredibly seriously because the consequences can be so serious. So we're going to be enforcing it closely. We will deal with any infractions immediately. And this is, again, the way, and I hope parents, you can impress upon your children how important this is. This is the way we keep one another safe. It's not about being brave. It's not about being a risk taker or a rebel. I know that adolescents like to be rebels. I kind of did too. But that's not what this represents. This is about making good, smart, careful, safe decisions. Badge wearing at the high school. I know that the enforcement of badge wearing in the past has been something that we have hoped would be a transition that we move through, but badge wearing is going to be important when students' faces are now covered by masks. We're going to have to know, particularly in the high school where students are the same size as the adults in the building, it's going to be very important to be able to identify who's supposed to be there, who really is part of our learning community. And so that's going to become something that we're also going to enforce in the new year. And so again, that's a conversation with students about making sure that they understand the reason for the policy. It's for their own safety. And the expectation is going to be that there's going to be compliance around that. The middle schools, obviously, we don't have the badges in the same way. And it's a little bit easier to identify who are the students and who are the adults in the building. But again, we're going to expect compliance with mask wearing and understanding that there are going to be consequences for students that don't comply. Hopefully, though, students who have lived through the last 5 months in quarantine know that this is a different world that we're in right now, a different environment. And I really do have confidence in our young people to make good choices. We'll support them in making those good choices. And we'll also treat them like the young adults they are and explain to them why these things are important and why they can be part of the solution and helping out. Been asked questions about the materials that masks should be made of. I know that there have been there was a study that was released last week, and that study had relative effectiveness of different mask materials. I anticipate there are probably going to be more studies that come out on this topic between now and the beginning of school. So rather than change our guidance 3-4 times between now and then, we're going to wait until we get a little bit closer to the start of school. But our school physician has advised us that it would make sense to limit the types of materials that masks can be made out of. What we know is that the standard surgical mask that is so familiar now is one of the best kinds of masks to wear. Protects the wearer as well as protecting people around the wearer. The district has an extensive stockpile of these masks in inventory, and we have more on order, and we will make them available to any student who forgets their mask, any teacher who forgets their mask. Every teacher will be provided with a supply of spare masks in their room so that if a student drops theirs on the floor, soils it with food, sneezes into it and wants to discard it, whatever could happen to a mask, there will be plenty of masks. We have adult-sized masks, we have pediatric-sized masks, so we'll be able to make those supplies available, and we'll be able to keep masks on everyone. We'll have plenty available to make sure that we can do that. I've been asked about whether students and staff can wear lanyards or necklaces. Those of us who are in my age bracket know what reading glasses are. And so you sometimes see reading glasses dangling from some kind of a necklace. All of those are permitted. And we will be doing training of students and staff on the proper wearing of a mask. It must cover not just your mouth, but also your nose. And the proper way to put a mask on and take it off. What's ideal is to take it off by using the loops that go around the ear and trying to avoid the part of the mask that covers the nose and mouth, because presumably if it's filtering out bad stuff, the bad stuff is on the outside of the mask where it got filtered. And so you'd want to avoid touching that as much as possible. So we will go through that. We do have training videos for the staff that are lined up to show on this and other things. Another question that we get asked quite a bit is about what will happen if there is a confirmed case or a suspected case of COVID in the schools. And the county health commissioner yesterday announced at the webinar that the Nassau County and Suffolk County have worked together on an FAQ, a frequently asked questions document, on exactly this topic. And they've released the document earlier today. I've had a chance to see it. We're going to, with their permission, post it on our website so that you have a chance to see it as well. But I can summarize, and it's very consistent with what we've been saying all along about testing and contact tracing and what to do in the event of a positive case. So if there is a positive case, the Department of Health takes the lead. The school district takes a support role. And what happens next is we will support them in their contact tracing work. And based on their contact tracing work, decisions will be made about who needs to isolate, and that's people who are actually sick get isolated, people who need to quarantine, and people who are exposed to someone who is sick but are not yet sick themselves go into quarantine. And then there will be what are called proximate contacts, which may not have to go into quarantine, but nevertheless may need to be observed over the course of a number of days. As the department has said, they don't isolate contact, they don't quarantine contacts of contacts. So that guidance is actually very clear. It's, I think, very well done. And it illustrates that there are no two situations that will be identical. So there's no hard and fast rule about what will happen if someone is identified. So the question we're often asked is, will the whole class quarantine? The answer to that is, it depends. And it depends on the conclusions that are drawn by the Department of Health. As we support them in their contact tracing work, one of the things that we've done as a school district, we've had several administrators take the Johns Hopkins contact tracing course, and we've had a number of nurses take the contact tracing course as well, so that we're up to speed on exactly the methodology that the health department will be using to conduct its contact tracing so that we can best support them in that effort. But they do take the lead, and that's the way that is by design. They are empowered to take the lead. We are asked to play a support role. So the other way we do our support role is by making sure that every piece of information we give them is accurate and complete. So we will have records of who rides buses. We will have daily attendance logs. We will have classroom attendance logs taken, period by period attendance taken. We should have very few visitors to the buildings, but if in the event there is a visitor to the building, we will have a very precise visitor log, exactly what time they arrived, what time they left, where they might have been in the building while they were there. All of these are to account for the movement of people in the building so that we can identify with clarity exactly who might have been in contact with someone. And that will literally go down to the level of seating charts in classrooms, and their algorithm for looking at their definition of what constitutes a close contact has to do with proximity. It has to do with the amount of time that someone is in a proximate location, and it's usually 10 or 15 minutes. Whether a mask was worn or not worn, all of that figures into the equation before they'll decide and determine that somebody is a close contact and therefore at risk. Close contacts do have to quarantine for 14 days. There's some discrepancy right now between the CDC guidance on what is required to return to school and the New York State guidance on what is required to return to school in terms of whether a negative COVID test is required. So we've sought, and so have my colleagues, sought clarification on that question. We haven't gotten that clarification yet, but we're awaiting it. And I know of a couple of other discrepancies that need to be ironed out between now and the start of school, but I also know that the folks in Albany are working hard on trying to make sure that they get those questions answered and answered right. So with that said, I want to shift back to Dr. Rufo for a few minutes and talk about lunch. Lunch is, again, going to be yet another of the many challenges that we have to work through. I am actually very proud of what Syosset accomplished this past spring and summer. We never interrupted our food services program, literally since the start of the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we were providing food to on a daily basis hundreds of families that might not have had food otherwise had it not been for our efforts. I'm really proud of that service that we provided to the community, and very impressed with the people that pulled it off. And leading that effort was Dr. Rufo. She's now been asked to lead the effort of reintroducing food service into our buildings for the fall, despite a number of new challenges.
So food services is going to clearly look very different. And at the secondary schools, it will take on two different forms. In the middle schools, students will be eating lunch in the classroom. And we are working on a system now to have students pre-order their meals. And so our current plan is that students will reorder their meals in advance, and the meals will be delivered to the students in their classrooms. One of the concerns that we always have with our lunch program is ensuring that allergy information, that we're attentive to allergy information. So before meals leave the cafeterias, they will be run through the POS system to ensure that, again, we're attentive to allergies. And one thing we know about the service, certainly at least initially, will be that it'll be more limited choices until things are moving more smoothly and we have a sense of full implementation. So at the middle school level, it'll be a cold service initially, and at the high school level, they will not be pre-ordering. It'll be a grab and go type lunch. And those students will be eating in several locations, the cafeteria locations at the high school, and then some others that we're looking at. We have purchased mobile carts that will be additional areas where students can purchase lunch. I guess when we talk about bumps, I think that it may be bumpy a bit in the beginning, and this will be new for everybody, but Aramark is working very hard to make things as smooth as they can. They also have implemented all new procedures for food safety, for sanitizing, and for ensuring their workers are coming to school healthy, and they have their own protocols. So that's sort of a summary of where we are with school lunch. Again, we're looking at, there's lots of different systems that are that we're looking at for pre-ordering. And so you'll be getting communications soon about how to log on. We're also looking to work with a system that ultimately integrates with the My School Meal systems that everybody is used to, but it doesn't look like that system will be up by the company, up and running by the time school starts. So we're looking at systems that can sort of hold us over until then, provide the pre-order functionality, and then later find a system that integrates nicely or smoothly with My School Meals. And I think that's, I just want to make sure that there's, oh, one other important thing is whether students are learning in person or remotely, we will have a lunch service, looking at having one location, likely the high school, because that's where we've had since the pandemic, where we've served lunches, grab and go lunches for people who may be just coming to pick up. And that's how we would handle some of the remote students having remote instruction.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rufo. Dr. Curry, in the questions, there are questions about students who are part of a BOCES program at Berry Tech. Perhaps you could talk about that a little bit and how that's going to work.
Sure. Berry Tech will be currently offering their program in-house every day. They are not functioning on an alternating day model. What we're working on right now is arranging for transportation for our students who participate in the programs through Berry Tech so that we can transport the students to their classes and then either return them to the high school on the days that they are assigned to attend in person, or to return them home on the days that they would be assigned in a virtual capacity. One of the other things that I wanted to mention, along with a lot of other new terminology, the two terms that we're using quite a bit that might be well served to provide a definition is the concept of the pilot and co-pilot in the classroom. What we want to do is give you assurances that the pilots and the co-pilots are all New York State certified teachers that are certified in both the content area and the grade level that they will be assigned to teach. Many of these individuals that are assigned the co-pilot title will be very familiar faces to our students. These are teachers that have previously filled extended roles in our classrooms as leave replacements. Many of them have been longtime instructional tutors in the Syosset schools. So the individuals will not only be familiar to the students, but they will be familiar to the high expectations that we have for all of our teachers in the classroom. Another term that might be somewhat confusing is we've often used the term overflow as far as classroom assignments. Please rest assured also that the overflow room will feel to students exactly the same as any classroom experience. These classrooms are all again staffed with our highly qualified teachers. It is only the term used so that we can keep track of how our student cohorts are divided, but they will be divided in both an academically and socially appropriate manner to balance the classroom compositions, as well as allow for us to provide the supports for all the variety of learning needs in the classroom, regardless of whether the student is in the classroom or the room designated as the overflow classroom. There was a question that came up regarding movement between the two rooms. In order to, on the middle school level, in order to really minimize that traffic flow, we thought it was prudent to not have the children move or the students move between classrooms, but whenever possible, we would have the adults, the teachers move. So in a situation where there's a pilot and co-pilot, there will be opportunities that those teachers will in fact change places and work with the different groups. They'll be instructing in a parallel fashion. So regardless of which room you are in, the experience for the student will be the same, again, to the high expectations that we have for our classrooms and for instruction. There will be times, however, on the middle school that the students themselves are moving, and that will be particularly where it is impossible to maintain those cohorts. And those would be examples of going to specials classes, going to music classes, going to world language classes. And David Balsamo, who is the world language coordinator, has been doing a wonderful job on helping and working with our middle school principals in order to coordinate the movement of students for their world language classes. Dr. Rogers?
Thank you. So Mr. Cardillo, can you just go a little bit deeper for us into what music and art will be like? A number of questions about that. And I know people have worries and questions about what will happen, particularly with wind instruments and singing. Please unmute, Mr. Cardillo.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Okay, so yeah, Michael Salzman has worked in conjunction with the building administration. So let's start with the high school. Ensembles, the band orchestra and chorus, the high school administration has been able to provide appropriate large space, for the students to be, for the ensembles to take place. We're going to adhere to the 12-foot guideline for social distancing for the band and for the choral students. The other aspect along the way is when the students are in the band, there were questions related to wind instrument students in the band. The teachers must wear a mask. The wind instrument players must wear masks at all times, except when they're playing the instruments. And there should be no talking in the room without a mask. So there's some protocols that Dr. Salzman has put into place for his high school teachers, the students in music. But what we have the benefit at the high school level is really the lessons are intact, the ensembles are intact, the location or appropriate locations and their large size locations to be able to allow the outstanding programs to continue. The orchestra students must wear masks during rehearsals. Students must observe 6 feet of social distance during rehearsals. Students must wash their hands before and after using a school-owned shared instrument. Shared instruments must be wiped down with a disinfectant cloth after each use. So there, again, important aspects of the whole aspect of what, the whole issue of health and safety as we go through this. Dr. Salzman has really spent a significant time. He's actually really a major leader in the State Music Association and has spent time really, working throughout the whole state related to the kind of items that we're putting into place here in Syosset. In chorus, a mask must be worn, obviously not when the students are singing. Students must observe 12 feet of social distancing as we go through this. And finally, in the section lessons, the same protocols will be in place that we just talked about in these other areas. If we go to the middle school, as we talked about, because of space constraints, we will have the ability to run the ensembles at the middle school, that being chorus, band, and orchestra. We're still working through the details related to lessons. So that's something really that's ongoing as we speak right now and may continue to be ongoing depending upon space availability as we look at each building and as they do it. The ensemble meetings at the middle school will be taking place in small sections, but in large areas. So at Southwoods, I believe they'll be using the cafeteria, one of the cafeterias to allow this to go on, and potentially even the auxiliary gym. Again, small sections in large areas for the ensembles. And that's basically it. Okay, a lot's been done really from where we were 2 or 3 weeks ago, where really it looked, the music program looked in a much more difficult situation because of the constraints that were placed upon the room utilization in both buildings. But again, both administrations, in addition with Dr. Salzman, did a great job of trying to at least get to this point.
And
Thanks, Charlie.
And just like the performance classes of our special areas, science is often seen as a performance-based class when it comes to our laboratory experiments and our hands-on research. Even prior to the situation we currently find ourselves in, science laboratory activities and laboratory experiments, we're really taking on more of a virtual platform in order to open up opportunities that wouldn't necessarily even be safe to bring into a normal in-person classroom. So there's a multitude of virtual and digital platforms out there that our teachers have been working all summer long on various curriculum projects, particularly in the areas of biology and chemistry, but there's also been a lot of work done in physics and the earth sciences that are centered on really offering those engaging, those exciting, and those standards-based virtual experiences for our students. For example, in the past, and although it's just a small piece, but dissections or comparative anatomy labs, now they are offered on a virtual platform that brings a clarity of an experience that can go even beyond what a child or a student might be able to see in the classroom. So in meeting the basic requirements for our Regents classes, but in Syosset, we certainly go above and beyond those basic requirements. The coursework that would now not be able to be done in person or at home is now open. The world is opened in a virtual platform for students to have these same experiences and perhaps even to a greater level than ever before. We have confirmed that New York State Education has allowed for their regulations to allow for us to receive credit for having our children and our students complete these labs on a virtual platform. Something else that's very important to our science research students that has just recently come about was the opportunity to have them engage in what is known as the SPSS software. It's a statistical program that will allow them to really continue with their in-depth science research projects, even from home and from a virtual platform. So if anything at all, the students might find that science in the virtual world is possibly even more exciting than the traditional hands-on labs. Oh, I forgot to mention, there's also been a lot of work done this summer on creating problem-based learning activities that would align themselves to lab work, but also to different coursework and different interactions with student groups in not only the science labs, but across the curricula.
Thank you, Dr. Curry. And if you couldn't tell, Dr. Curry is a former science teacher herself, and so her enthusiasm is leaking through in this particular topic. I'm looking through some of the live questions that have been coming in since we started the presentation, and there does seem to be a little bit of confusion still about how the high school day is going to look and to work. And so I'm going to build on Mr. Cardillo's example. We'll talk about little Charlie and little Tommy, and they're all going to be in Dr. Curry's science class. So we're taking biology first period with Dr. Curry, and Charlie and Tommy are in the class, but Charlie, his last name starts with a C. So he's going to come on the first day of school, and Tommy is going to come on the second day of school because his last name starts with R. But Tommy's going to watch the instruction that's going on the first day from home. And then on the second day, Tommy's going to be in class and Charlie's going to watch the instruction that's going on. We're both still in Dr. Curry's class. We're both still going through the curriculum at the same pace. We're just taking turns who's going to be in the class and who's going to be doing the observation from home. And in a second, I'll ask Christine Payne to describe what that experience will be like at home through our Classroom to Go product. But the other thing that keeps getting asked is, is the school day only 4 weeks? What happens on Fridays? Are there missing days? No, so it is a 4-day cycle, but it is a 5-day week. So the way to think about this is, if it's a Monday through Friday week, Monday is day 1, Tuesday is day 2, Wednesday is day 3, Thursday is day 4, Friday goes back to day 1. And then the next week, Monday will be a 2. And you'll just move through in that way. And that way you have the same number of 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And then the red day, white day is a little bit confusing. So in science in particular, there's a lab. And the lab is usually every other day. So let's say the lab is on a red day. So if the days alternated red, white, Tommy would always be in on red days and Charlie would always be in on white days. One of us wouldn't get the lab. So what we have to do is, the calendar is set up so that it goes red, red. Charlie gets a red day, Tommy gets a red day. Then it's white, white. Charlie gets a white day, Tommy gets a white day. And then it goes back to the beginning again. Red, red, white, white. So the red days alternate on a 2-day cycle, and the students alternate on an every other day cycle. And that way everybody gets the same number of red days, the same number of white days, and we get to alternate being in and out of classroom. And we looked at a number of different models for how to do that. We think this is the one that keeps students connected to the learning community most, by having it be an every other day model. And it also means that the students in the classroom will move through the curriculum at the same pace because they're moving through it together. So I hope that clarifies the questions that were in the chat. And I'm looking a little bit at the clock and also seeing that we have a lot of other topics to cover. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of a lightning round and go through some topics that need to be covered. So logistics, there have been, oh no, I want to have Christine tell us a little bit about the Classroom to Go, so that we know what that experience will be like learning from home. Christine, sorry about that.
No, that's okay, Dr. Rogers. Thank you. I'm very excited to talk about the Classroom to Go model that came about during the task force meetings, and we talked to teachers and we talked to parents, and we really worked out a model that we hope will be most beneficial to our students. All of the teachers are getting a business grade laptop that will handle these virtual environments and the video conferencing at a much better rate than we had over in March. We learned our lesson about this. We've created a virtualized environment for students who are doing robotics and art and coding and science research. We're very happy to say that even on the Chromebook, the kids can use, as long as they have a Chrome browser or any browser, they can go into our virtualized environment and run those very robust programs from our servers. I also wanted to say that we've been spending time upgrading our fiber to the district. We've used our E-rate money to upgrade our switches and our networking in the district. So we're ready to go that way. Our classroom to go model for the teachers will be this robust business grade laptop. A tablet will allow them to replicate the smart board or interactive board that they have in their classroom. A document camera, as many of you may remember the overhead projector when you were in school, the document camera will allow teachers to show their handwriting. So if they're working out problems, they can use paper or they could use a whiteboard that will be displayed simultaneously to teachers, to students at home and in the school. We are providing amplification devices for teachers so that students will be clearly heard. We're also providing a lot of new digital resources to teachers so that they can have conferencing with students, small group instruction, breakout instruction with students. So we're really developing a very robust virtual online learning and in-person environment. This will provide the opportunity for the pilot and the co-pilot to communicate with each other virtually, as well as with any students that are at home. And in the hopefully unlikely event that schools are shut down, the classroom to go model can be taken home by the teacher and the same form of instruction will be used. So there won't be any regression or confusion or anxiety about how my day is going to continue. It will continue as if the teachers were in school. So I'm very, very happy with this. I also want to quickly mention that we will have an in-person live help desk at the high school library for the teachers that are getting the new laptops, as well as any student that has Chromebook issues. That it will be socially distanced. We will have charging stations for everyone. We will have a live help desk as well, where parents and students can connect with technicians if they're having difficulty at home. I also wanted one other thing to mention as part of our technology plan, not part of our pandemic plan, the incoming ninth graders will be receiving new Chromebooks. So there will be communications coming out soon. The students will be trading in their Chromebooks that they have been using, and they will receive a brand new model.
Great. Thank you for that. So I want to go through, as I said, a little bit of a lightning round. There's lots of questions about switching back and forth between the virtual and in-person classrooms. What we've said is that we can accommodate switches to virtual, but we may not be able to accommodate switches back to in-person, but we would look at that on a quarterly basis at the secondary schools to coincide with the marking periods. So obviously we want to give people the flexibility if we can do it, but we also have class size maximums and the room size maximums. So we're operating socially distanced classrooms, and there will be a size limitation ultimately on those classrooms. So we will look at it on a quarterly basis. It'll be addressed on a space available basis. There's sort of always space in the virtual world. So it's a little bit easier to go in that direction. And so if someone starts out in person and they feel nervous and they want to go to the virtual environment, we'll find a way to accommodate that. Part of the reason for wanting to do that is obviously we want to give parents options. I know that there are a number of school districts that at least initially did not start out offering options. They only offered one option, but we recognize that this is a challenging decision, and we wanted to present you with options that you felt the most comfortable with. So there will be temperature scanners when you arrive at school. Nurses will have handheld touchless thermometers, and especially at the high school, we're going to have a temperature scanning station that integrates with the badge scanning station. It will not record a student's temperature. That would be health information, which we're not allowed to have, but it will just record a pass-fail. So if a student's temperature is below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, they will pass. If it is above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, they'll go to the isolation area. Every building has an isolation area that's in addition to the regular nurses station. One of the things that we're doing with our ventilation projects this summer is all of those nurses stations and the isolation rooms are being upgraded with what are called negative pressure ventilation systems. In other words, the air in those rooms goes directly outside. It's exhausted directly outside, not into the rest of the building. So the pressure in those rooms is lower than in the rooms around them. So air rushes into those rooms and doesn't rush out of those rooms. And presumably if they're hosting a student who might be ill, you wouldn't want the air to leave those rooms. You'd want the air to exit directly into the atmosphere. The music and art quarantine states and return to school. So we are getting close to the start of school. New York State has in effect a mandatory quarantine on people who are returning from either international travel or travel to one of, I believe it's 31 quarantine states. The states on that list change frequently. They can be accessed on the Department of Health website. And the quarantine is mandatory. It's Executive Order 205. Executive orders during the pandemic have force of law, and the executive order provides for a $10,000 civil penalty for someone who does not abide by the mandatory quarantine. So we'll be communicating with families shortly to alert them that the deadline to start the mandatory quarantine in order to be eligible to attend school on the 8th is about to begin. And we'll let parents know what that date is. If someone travels after that date, it may be that their child is not eligible to start school on September 8th because they will not have cleared the 14-day mandatory quarantine. And again, I realize this is an inconvenience, and there are parents who are taking some kids back to college in other states and have other kids who are still in high school or middle school here. And it's a complication. There's no question about it. But the executive order is in place, and there are these civil penalties. We don't want anyone to be penalized. We're not an enforcement agency for those civil penalties, but I could certainly imagine if something went wrong, that would be a question that would be asked after the fact. And so we don't want anyone to be caught up short or unaware of that. So we'll be doing some communication with parents about that. Get a lot of questions about athletics and when will sports start back up again. If you're in the athletics program, you already know how fond I am of it. And one of my favorite things to do at the end of the day is what I call my lap. And I'll leave the office, go out to each one of the outdoor fields. I kind of make a counterclockwise loop around the high school campus, go to softball, JV baseball, what used to be the soccer field, the gym, the tennis courts, the main field, whatever is going on at that time. And I usually get to see half a dozen sports at any given time, you know, in the process of practicing or scrimmaging or playing. And I've missed that. I missed that this spring. And obviously we miss it every summer, and we want it to start as soon as possible. For now, what we're being told is that sports will potentially start on September 21, but they have also issued and released their fallback plan. If it is not possible for sports to start on September 21, sports will start in the January timeframe. There will be 3 different seasons. The winter, fall, and spring seasons will go in that order in January. There will be overlap between those abbreviated seasons, which may force students to have to choose between 2 sports that they might want to participate in. Obviously, it's our hope that that doesn't have to be the strategy, but that is the fallback plan if sports don't start. The governor was asked about this at a press conference a couple of days ago. He said that sports are not permitted to start back up again yet, didn't make any comment beyond that in terms of whether we're going to do the fallback plan. We've been asked whether we can have coaches interacting with students during the summer. There's state guidance on this. The state guidance is very clear that we cannot. Interscholastic athletics is not permitted until we're told otherwise. And the date of that would be September 21st if we're allowed to do that. So I realize that's unfortunate. I know that many of our coaches are so dedicated and spend time with our students above and beyond the regular seasons. And I know that that's what makes the bond between our students and our coaches so strong. And I'm sure that it's part of the reason for our success on the athletic fields is the fact that we do put so much energy into it and our staff is so dedicated to it. But at this time, it's not been deemed to be safe yet. And so, again, in the interest of safety, we have to abide by that. What I was asked questions about Regents exams and whether there will be Regents exams. We got the same question about the grades 3 through 8 English and math exams. Those apply to students in the middle schools. The grade 3 through 8 exams are federally mandated exams. This past spring, the federal government said that they were not going to require the exams for the spring 2020 time period. They did not make any pronouncements beyond that. Then once they made that announcement, the state made a similar announcement. New York did the same thing and canceled the 3 through 8 exams. The state controls Regents exams in its own sole authority, but there still has to be at least 5 end of course assessments to graduate from high school. So again, the federal government issued leniency around the 5 exams. The state Board of Regents said that they would cancel Regents exams for the current year. No decision has been made yet about the upcoming year. The federal government actually has plenty of time before they have to make a final decision about the 3 through 8 testing. The state government, State Board of Regents, will probably have to make a decision sometime this fall, because the first round of Regents exams occurs in January. And so they'll have to give schools that rely on those exams a lot of advance warning on what to expect and whether those exams are going to be held or whether they'll have to plan for different kinds of exams. Mr. Cardillo, I don't know if you've spoken to the high school staff or the middle school staff about how quizzes and other kinds of assessments are going to be handled during the school year yet?
So yeah, our conversation is focused on returning really to traditional grading practices that were in existence prior to us in mid-March for what was in place at that time. So we've talked to the administration. We have further conversations on that, but the response from the high school and middle school administration, we'd be returning to traditional grading practices.
Another question we get frequently is driver's education. So driver's education was suspended in the spring. There were a number of students, obviously, who had started driver's ed and were unable to complete it. We know that the state has allowed commercial driver's ed businesses to resume operations. They have not allowed school districts to resume operations at this time. We do check periodically to see if there's any updated guidance on that. Our plan is, once it is possible to do driver's ed again, once we're allowed to do driver's ed, we will try to finish off the students who already got started. And then my understanding is that we go in the order of birth dates for students that have not started driver's ed yet. So oldest students first. So that will be the plan if and when the state allows us to do driver's education. And I would imagine that it's hard for me to imagine that the state will allow us to do driver's education without also giving us guidance on how to do it safely in the car, whether there's just one person in the car with the instructor or what has to occur in the car to make that happen. So I'm sure that that's part of what's holding up any decision about doing that at the state level. We're getting, lots of questions about security and how we'll handle security. We've been in contact with, literally as recently as today, the Department of Homeland Security. Every school district is assigned a liaison from the Department of Homeland Security to work with us on security issues. They're certainly aware of the challenges that we have and the approaches that we need to take, both to combat the virus and also to keep our campuses safe. We've been working closely with them. We have a dedicated director of security, former law enforcement officer, sergeant with the New York City Police Department, a tactical sergeant. And we also have a security consultant. So that entire team has been working on how to make this a safe environment for us going back to school. Over the last couple of years, we've made a number of investments in security, and we've also made a number of really terrific hires. In addition to our director of security, we've been hiring retired law enforcement officers to be our on-campus security force. They have law enforcement background. They have been handpicked by our security consultant, and I work with them very frequently, and I have found them to be very professional, very thorough, very dedicated, and very sharp-eyed. So we're pleased to have them here. After school activities is a question that's come up a lot. We're working through that right now. That's one of those details that we will have more information about as we get closer to the start of school. It is likely that many of those activities will occur in the virtual world. We're trying to preserve our thought process on how we're approaching all of this, is that the classroom environment, the opportunity to learn in person, the socialization that students need is so important. And we do that when we're at school. There are a number of other things that we also do at school, but they represent risks. And just as I'm saying that we in the community have to forego some things that we like in order to avoid risk, there are going to be activities that we'll preserve, but we'll probably convert to virtual formats in order, again, to preserve the activity, but decrease the amount of risk that comes along with that. So I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we're almost out of time. And I just want to take a couple of minutes as we close to just kind of go back, reemphasize a couple of themes. Just say, first of all, a thank you to the team that joined me tonight. This is their third night in a row of presenting along with me. I have to do this. They get to do this. Lucky you. And they have been just so dedicated and so hardworking this summer. I really couldn't do it without them. And I really couldn't do it if they weren't so dedicated and putting in so much time, because this really is for us going to be a sprint literally to the last day before we start. So thank you for that. As we've said a couple of times, our priority is the physical safety, thinking about how to do this in-person environment in the least risky way possible. And then how do you make the best instructional program possible within that constraint? But the one thing that we know is that this is not going to be the regular Syosset year, the regular Syosset education, all of the things that we try to do to make it perfect every year, we're not going to be able to achieve. This is going to be our hope for what is the best that can possibly be achieved in a pandemic. I am sure, just like the spring, things got better as the spring went on and we became more comfortable with the online environment. We learned a little bit, we iterated a lot, our teachers became more proficient. I'm sure the same thing is going to happen this year. It's going to be a learning experience for all of us from start to finish. We're all dedicated to this. Our teachers are so dedicated. The administrators, the leaders in the building are so dedicated. We're all going to try and make this the best experience possible for your children, whether they're with us live or virtually in a classroom. But it won't be what we'll all hope for. What we're going to hope for is going back to the in-person environment, hopefully in the 2021 school year, if not before, if circumstances change and that becomes possible. As I've said frequently, I think we're 5 months into an 18-month crisis. We have to plan for the long haul. We can't let ourselves grow complacent. We can't let ourselves grow fatigued. We're going to have to keep doing the things that we know worked to flatten the curve in the spring, that are currently keeping us safe now, and that are going to be necessary to keep us safe as we return to some of the more familiar activities of assembling at schools. I do think that when this period of history is over, we will look back on this time and we will say to ourselves that we lived through a remarkable period in history. Our young people will tell stories to their grandkids, and their grandkids will, of course, be in disbelief of what they went through when they lived through this period in history. And I do hope that we'll look back on this time ourselves and say, this was our finest hour. It's certainly the biggest test I've experienced in my career. It is the biggest test I think that we've seen as a community. And when we're tested, we're refined. And my hope is that this test will prove exactly what we're made of as a community and our ability to work together and to accomplish something remarkable as a result of that. So we will pull together. By pulling together, we will pull through. I'm very proud and very privileged to lead this team of extraordinary people that you see before you, but the team of all of the people at Syosset who are working so hard to make this year a success for your young people. And I know that I speak for all of us when I say we consider it an absolute privilege to serve this community in this important endeavor. So with that, I'll say good night to everybody. I hope you're all safe. I hope you're all well. And we'll see you hopefully in a couple of weeks again soon.